Alright, so I thought I'd do a quick video. There are a couple of really big issues coming up in politics as we near primary and midterm election season. There's this new push to extend the Bush tax cuts, and the way the Republicans are framing this is that Democrats are poised to create the largest tax hike, ever. I think maybe not ever, but certainly a long time. And I'll give you some historical background as to why, if the Democrats do nothing, taxes are going up. It's not that Democrats are proactively signing legislation to raise taxes, as some Republicans and pundits would have you believe. It's simply that if they do nothing, taxes will increase, mostly on the top, 5% of people in America. And basically what happened is back in 2001, whenever the Bush tax cuts were signed into law, they had to use budget reconciliation, which is a buzzword we heard during healthcare debate, to get them signed into law. And part of budget reconciliation, part of the rules state that you cannot increase the deficit for more than 10 years under budget reconciliation. So the Bush tax cuts, by very nature, reduce the amount of income coming into the government, thereby increasing deficits, which they will argue is offset by job creation and increased spending, which is not actually true. I mean, they're really not offset. But so when they signed it into law, they were set to expire. So the Republicans signed these huge tax cuts into law, knowing that they were going to expire. And I think their real hope was obviously that they would still be in power and be able to extend it. And that's why when they were passing it, they were able to say, look, over the long term, it doesn't increase the deficit that much. And that's because they don't actually stay in effect for that long. They expire after 10 years. So these Republicans who are, it was great. I watched a clip of Sarah Palin talking about the tax cuts, and she said, we don't need to let taxes go up. We need to cut spending. And there's a sort of political amnesia where, people forget that George Bush entered office and there was a surplus. And basically what he said, with trillions of dollars of debt on the balance sheet, he said government was living too large, that they were taking in too much money because, why would there be a surplus unless the government was taking too much money? So let's sign tax cuts. And, it hurts your brain if you really think about it. It's like somebody who's, got $10,000 worth of credit card debt, and they decide to give half of their money to charity because, they're having money left over at the end of the month. I mean, that's really what George Bush, the thought process there was. He said, we wouldn't want to start paying down our national debt, so let's do tax cuts. And basically, for some people, it comes down to competing economic theories. There's the obvious, was that if you take in more money than you're spending, you'll be able to pay off your debt. And then there's this other Republican idea, which is that if you cut taxes for the wealthy, that you'll be able to make that money back plus more, because they'll spend it and they'll create jobs. And I think that's a load of shit. I think trickle down doesn't work. I think it's really good, if you had some magic pixie dust and you could sprinkle it, I think you'd be okay. But it's sort of the crazy rationale. It's the same way that Republicans are able to get lower and middle class people to actively support their party when they'd be better off. I mean, the vast majorities of Americans would be better off if the tax rate for the top 5 or 10% was increased, and they were able to reap the benefits, whether it's through enhanced federal scholarships or grants, or there's so many reasons why the lower and middle classes should support Democratic policies, more fiscal balance, less tax cuts for the wealthy. There are all kinds of self-interest motivations, but we've created this sort of idea in America that you too can be an entrepreneur and get rich, and that sort of dream, and I wouldn't call it the American dream, I'd call it the American illusion, helps the Republicans stay in power, and people vote against what is quite possibly their good interest, which is disappointing for me as a scholar of history and sociology and political enthusiast. That you kind of want to grab them by the throat and say, this isn't good for you, but you gotta let them vote the way they do. But Republicans have to, they can advocate for tax cuts or a balanced budget, but to say that we should cut taxes and then cut spending, unless we're cutting military expenditures, in which case I'm fine. There's a whole bunch of pork in the defense bill and defense appropriations and the Pentagon budget that we can cut. But if you're talking about cutting social programs even more at a time when states and local governments are severely down on tax revenue and cutting essential services, not to mention education, which I would argue is an essential service, right there with firemen and policemen. I can't sign on board with that. If you want to, balance the budget by cutting taxes and reducing military spending, and appropriate or earmarks, then that's fine. But there's this sort of idea that we can, deficit finance tax cuts for the wealthy, but not social programs and the safety net for American workers. So, anyways, that's my little nice rant on Republicans and the Bush tax cuts, and I'll talk to you guys later.